Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation 4 to take a look at another premium ship in World of Warships Legends. This time we'll be reviewing the Tier 6 American light cruiser, USS Flint. For this review, I'll start with some history, move into analysis, discuss commanders, run down the stats with you, and then we'll finish off with some gameplay. If you do want to skip around at all, I should have left some time codes down in the description to help you out. The USS Flint is one of 8 ships in the Atlanta class, and one of the latter 4 ships constructed in it, so also technically a member of the Oakland subclass. The Atlanta was originally envisioned as a light cruiser, capable of scouting or functioning as a flotilla leader, essentially being a cruiser fast enough to keep pace with other destroyers, but with more accommodations for command staff and more powerful signaling equipment. Being armed with the same guns, that being the fantastic dual-purpose 127mm guns found on pretty much every American destroyer from 1932 through the end of World War II, their non-traditional armament meant that they might have had some theoretical logistical advantages if the war actually worked anything like people had expected it to. The initial order of 4 Atlanta-class ships featured a main battery of 16 guns in 8 turrets, with 3 twin turrets forward, 3 aft, and 1 wing turret on each side. The Oakland subclass was redesigned to accommodate even more intermediate range anti-aircraft, and perhaps in part to try to save on weight mounted above the waterline, which made these ships somewhat top-heavy. They accomplished this by removing a wing turret in favor of additional AA mounts. The design would be further honed in the Juno class which followed, but the Juno was sufficiently different to warrant it being its own class, and not the subject of our video today. In any case, the Flint was laid down in August 1941, launched in January 1944, and commissioned into service in August of that same year. The Flint is kind of a curious pick for World of Warships Legends, having entered the war fairly late, and I would be curious to know why she was picked over the Oakland herself, which had a longer and significantly more active service history. So by the time that the Flint entered service, there were only a few months remaining in the war, and by that point, the role of the Atlanta-class cruisers was pretty well cemented. Though they were not ideal for surface combat, owing to their lack of armor and torpedo protection, the Flint's first assignment, therefore, was to escort U.S. carriers during the invasion of Luzon, the largest island of the Philippines. This was followed by similar duties for carriers striking both Tokyo and Iwo Jima. By this point, Japanese kamikazes were very common, and the Flint, like other Atlantas, proved itself a capable anti-aircraft platform, aiding in shooting down several Japanese attackers. She would support operations on Okinawa, some of the southernmost islands of Japan, before she actually got stuck into some shore bombardment duty of mainland Japan. She would remain an escort of carriers until the cessation of hostilities, after which, like just about every ship that had capacity, she participated in Operation Magic Carpet, returning servicemen home. In total, the Flint earned 4 battle stars during the war. Following World War II, she was placed into reserve in 1947 and reclassified from CL-97, or light cruiser, to CLAA-97, in acknowledgement of her role as an anti-aircraft cruiser. She would never again see combat, though, and was sold for scrap in October 1966. As far as the Flint in the game, essentially similar to the Atlanta in a lot of ways, the Flint is designed to engage at longer ranges and adopt what I would call a more passive playstyle. In addition to the range of your guns, you basically double the range of your torpedoes, but you have a smaller main battery overall. But the Flint has your typical low fire chance and sky-high shell arcs that you find on the Atlanta and pretty much all American destroyers, which means that it is both exceptionally difficult to actually hit anything at range, and in the event that you actually do, you'll probably require more than a few shots to set anything on fire. To aid the Flint in this task, she has a smoke screen, which is a neat trick. With very small guns, she has relatively low sea detectability while firing in her smoke, though it is higher than you would expect. But you trade radar for this, and if you were tallying the things that the Flint has in its favor, you could probably add some area denial ability due to its 9-kilometer torpedoes. But since you're not an exceptional fire starter, at least compared to ships like the Helena, Shores, Boise, or Belfast, it really does feel like the Flint is trading away the one area where the Atlanta really was superb. and that was being a destroyer's worst nightmare. So by and large, my impression of the Flint is she's a less capable Atlanta, but if she appeals to anyone, it's probably more because of this rain of fire camo, the psychological effects you might think that causes on your enemy, or that you're especially fond of Flint, Michigan, or the boat due to some family connection. And while I didn't test this in a platoon, I would probably have to agree with my fellow German CC, Mark aka White, that the Flint probably favors division play, so that could probably also improve your enjoyment of this ship, admittedly. But for me, testing it alone, I didn't like the relative helplessness I felt in the Flint, having neither the speed to run down destroyers nor the radar to magically reveal their location. Frankly, I'm fairly certain that a lot of destroyer commanders knew I didn't have that many tricks up my sleeve, and therefore they don't have to respect the space around you when you're playing the Flint, which is really obnoxious. While the ability to move around the map and hide pretty much anywhere you want is definitely useful, it just doesn't feel like a great trade for me overall. So if you're in the market for a Flint, I would strongly consider an Atlanta instead. But enough about that. Let's talk about what you can do in terms of commanders to make the Flint a more comfortable ship for you. As I've said before, the go-to commander for American cruisers is likely Scott. And on the Flint, there are some pretty good reasons why you'd want to do this, but they're very, very different from why you might want to use Scott on your heavy cruiser. And let me say this straight up, unless you are gifted with some supernatural powers of observation or the ability to mind control your enemies to sail beneath the rain of your shellfire, you probably don't want to increase the range of your main battery, because you'll never hit anything absent an extremely accommodating enemy, or one who at least has no better option than to sit and hope that someone murders you quickly. Instead, the reason why you choose Scott is to increase the fire chance as much as possible. Since you have small caliber shells, you're going to get a lot of shatters that do no damage against your enemy. Most of your hopes of doing damage are going to come instead from setting fires. While the base 5% on the Atlanta shells isn't very high, you can double that to 10 with Scott, which actually does make a noticeable effect on how much you can make everyone else want to uninstall the game. Couple that with the highest rate of fire, and Scott makes perhaps the best choice for the Flint. Just remember, if you're going for range and accuracy, particularly together, with the exceptionally long flight times, sometimes upwards of 20 seconds, this is just going to help you group your misses a lot better. Kincaid, being the other cruiser captain, was also worth a shot. By and large, Kincaid helps the Flint in two ways. You can get the fastest and most maneuverable version of the Flint with him, which means that you have a better chance of relocating when you need to. And if you're not able to avoid being shot, then you do get some damage reduction from abilities like Sponge. The reason I'd call Ingenious and Armed and Ready a Siren Song is not because these are bad abilities, but they might distract you away from getting a higher fire chance, which you really want in this, and a slightly more durable ship. Honestly, I took Sponge when using Flint just in hopes to keep my turrets in the game, because the Flint, like the Atlanta, has turrets that seem to be very prone to being disabled or knocked out entirely, where this isn't quite as much of a deal on the Atlanta since you have so many more guns than any other tier 6 light cruiser. In the Flint, you kind of do need all the firepower you can get to remain competitive. And last, and certainly not least in our hearts and minds, is the great American rock star himself, George Dewey. The game you'll see later will actually feature George Dewey as commander, and for the most part, the reason why this is effective is that you can go for a triple stealth build with Dewey, allowing you to theoretically stealth launch your torpedoes, just barely. Your fourth slot will also allow you to make more use out of the limited number of smoke screens that you have. He also is the only commander with the ability to boost the Flint's torpedo effectiveness, which is a benefit of really questionable value, but honestly the triple stealth build is something that I would be a lot more interested playing on the Atlanta because of the radar than the Flint. And frankly, as soon as this review is up, Boss Dewey's going back to the kid anyway, so that's just too bad. For stats, we will be comparing the Flint versus its half-sister, the Atlanta. While functionally this means I am comparing two premium ships together, I'm sorry, but I don't have the Helena because of some truly tragic loot box situation. When we compare the Flint and Atlanta for survivability, these two ships have exactly the same armor scheme, which is unsurprising. The 6 to 86 millimeters that you see here is extremely thin, And this can be something of an advantage, as both ships are extremely prone to overpenetration, and at least compared to being shot when moderately angled, going flat broadside in this ship often works pretty well, right up until the point where it suddenly doesn't. Neither ship has any torpedo protection, which is as historically accurate as it is brutal if you happen to take a torpedo. One place that these ships really do differ is HP, with the 26,600 that you see on screen being 900 less than you'll find on the Atlanta. Artillery on the Flint is pretty similar in a lot of ways to the Atlanta. Both ships are armed with twin 127mm turrets. The Flint just happens to have two less of them. With a broadside situation, this actually isn't that much of a deal, because you'd be looking at taking 12 shots rather than 14. But when engaging in knife fights against destroyers, you definitely will miss having one or two additional turrets that can shoot forward. Where, in theory, you make up for this is that your range is 2.6 kilometers longer, which seems like a pretty substantial advantage. I will draw your attention back to the June 2020 balance changes, when these same guns were given flatter arc on the Fletcher, essentially because no one could hit anything at 10 kilometers. So I wouldn't hope for great things at 14.7 kilometers, much less 16.5 if you want to go for even longer ranges. In any case, all of these other stats here are exactly the same damage, same traverse, same everything. In the world of torpedoes, the Atlanta has torpedoes best suited for discouraging people from getting too close to you in the first place, and if they are brave enough to try, to hopefully take them with you, because things are probably not going to go all that well for you either. The Flint does have very similar torpedoes in every respect, other than range, speed, and detectability. At 9.2 kilometers, the range is actually quite good, which makes using these in an area denial capacity a very real possibility. To put it most plainly, it actually makes the torpedoes useful. They are less detectable, being positively ninja torpedoes with just 1.1 kilometer detectability, though they travel along at a positively leisurely 55 knots. While AA statistics are not currently in the game, though hopefully these will come back soon, I did talk about the Atlanta being an excellent AA ship in my review of her. If you look carefully at the Flint, you'll notice that she has 4 extra Oerlikon mounts and has swapped out the Atlanta Chicago pianos for twin Bofors, and then added 2 more. When aircraft carriers do come to Legends, I expect that both the Atlanta and the Flint will be costly targets for carrier players, with both ships capable of pumping out unholy amounts of freedom in the direction of any approaching aircraft. And I imagine that the Flint will probably edge out the Atlanta in overall AA defense, if only slightly, and come in a little bit behind the Atlanta in terms of long-range AA. Where maneuverability is concerned, both the Atlanta and the Flint are remarkably maneuverable cruisers, with a tight turning circle and a responsive rudder, which obviously you can make even better with equipment. That said, they boast modest to decent speed, though you will still find that there are several cruisers at the tier that are capable of running you down. Concealment for both ships is also identical. It's actually quite good in general, and for the tier specifically. The one thing you will want to pay note of here is that you do have a 5.2 detectability while firing from smoke. That's quite a bit higher than you might expect if you figure these basically have the same guns as American destroyers, but it is the same as you find on the Atlanta. But if you played the Atlanta, you probably don't have the luxury of sitting around in smoke quite as often as you'll find on the Flint. Finally, as we look at consumables, the Atlanta has a standard Tier 6 American sonar, so you're going to get something that you should probably be fairly familiar with. The big trade-off here we've already kind of discussed, but the Flint does not have radar. Instead, you have a smoke screen. Normally you start with just 2 of these, though there's a decent chance you're going to start with 3, particularly if you're not using Norman Scott. You have 27 seconds of dispersion, and your smoke lasts for 2 minutes, before requiring 4 minutes to recharge. As you can tell, you might be running up against the clock if you actually wanted to use 3 smoke screens, but it is actually sometimes possible, and particularly if you're using Dewey, the duration can increase a few dozen seconds while also reducing the recharge time when using certain skills. Alright, so now we're finally going to get into some gameplay. We're going to be on Trident. Here you can see the Flint in all of her glory, such as it is. I will go ahead and put my commander up on the screen. As promised, we have Dewey, not quite the Boss Dewey setup, but what we're going for here is all sorts of concealment and trying to make the most out of my smoke. Now, I, in full disclosure, probably don't use smoke as much as I probably should, but then again, I am an extremely aggressive player, and there are reasons why this ship may not appeal to me. But we'll try to talk through what it's good at, what it's not so good at, and try to give you a fair feel for what the ship is all about. In any case, we are coming up upon I'm going to try to sit near this gap because, of course, I'm kind of hoping to be able to find a couple of ships, like this Iowa here, who want to go all the way around the map, and I can use some of these islands to my advantage. Now, I was pretty sure I was going to get spotted, and I was, which means there's a destroyer in the middle, which is now plainly apparent because he's capturing the base. Now, at 13.5 kilometers, you can see it's going to take around 14 seconds for my shells to get there. And what we're doing right now is just kind of struggling to see if we can't actually hit this darn Iowa. We've done it a couple of times. We've got a lot of misses. You can see we are giving him a pretty good lead here, and it's still pretty challenging to actually hit him. Now, he's being very accommodating as far as enemies go, and he was driving in a straight line for a good period of time. Now, you're not watching me try to shoot at a dodging cruiser. You can kind of imagine at 13.5 seconds, it's hard to hit anybody who's actively trying to get out of the way of your shots, even if it's just a little bit. Now, not so much. He's turning in, and I kind of want him to make some decisions about where he wants to go. I also have things that are both closer to me and more fun to shoot at, that being this Jervis here. Now, the amount of damage I'm putting out on the Jervis is pretty considerable, and it's only a little bit less than I could probably expect if I was actually using the Atlanta instead of the Flint. I just have an extra 2 guns, but maybe I'd get lucky and actually hit something. This is relatively unsurprising in terms of there are torpedoes coming at me. You can tell I was pretty sure that they were going to be coming even before they popped up on my screen, so we were already kind of deciding to get out of our smoke screen for a second, at the very least. Now, I'm pretty sure there are other people here, though, and I'm kind of moving forward to see if I can't take a peek. You can see I have been spotted again. I'm spotted with an eyeball. So there we have it. It's a Yudachi. I will be happy to shoot at him. Try to give him a decent lead. Maybe a little too much there. We start turning in. This is going to both allow us not to slam face first into the island and also dodge those torps. We got past most of them. This is pretty close and a good example of why people love the Atlanta, at least from an aggressive point of view. You know, you do have the ability to actually dodge torpedoes pretty well. Particularly with the Atlanta, you'd have an extra turret there, which would, again, help you just a little bit. This whole situation with the Helena is a little unfortunate because the Helena will definitely chew me to pieces. I can also chew him to pieces, particularly if I can get him broadside. Then these little guns will actually punch through his armor pretty effortlessly. And it looks like he might be giving me a little bit more of the opportunity. But he doesn't get all the way around. We actually do manage to just gun him down. And now, I've got that Iowa behind me, and pretty much all the excitement is already past. The game is basically over. I've got that triple concealment. I don't want to get in a protracted fight with an Iowa, so I am checking over my shoulder to see, am I going to be able to lose my spot? I actually do. My sea detectability on this particular build is 8.8 kilometers, so I've got 400 meters of stealth torpedo launches. Not enough to really try to run this as a dedicated super destroyer, but it's enough that you could theoretically do it. Now we just happen to sit here for a couple more seconds. We finish off the cap because we're sneaky enough to be able to do it. And now we're going to drive away because I don't need to fight that. We'll let somebody else saddle up to fight the Iowa, preferably a battleship, something that has a little bit of armor and isn't going to get straight up deleted. You can see we've got the range pretty well honed in there at 9.5 kilometers. We do manage to set a fire, but we're only up to 4 fires on 143 hits. That's not uncommon with a low percentage of fire. Sometimes you have really unlucky games where you have 250 hits and 3 fires, and that just makes you love the game even more. Other games you have, 100 hits and 16 fires, and it's just insane. But what we're doing is helping to contribute to the damage. This is most of what a Flint player wants to do. What you saw earlier, really what I like to do with an Atlanta, and what an Atlanta's frankly better at. So in that case, we catch a blind shot, but we're continuing to pump plenty of damage out there. You do want to aim high with the Flint, just like with the Atlanta. We're trying to hit as much superstructure as physically possible, and we do manage to come away with another 2,800 damage there. Our fire manages to finish him off, and we had a pretty short and effective game there. That said, most of what you saw here is every bit as attainable in an Atlanta, with maybe the exception of just sitting in the open and shooting at an Iowa. The thing about islands, they are superior to smoke screens because torpedoes can't go through islands. So, something to consider. There's no substitute for what the Atlanta can do in the right hands, and the smoke screen seems not quite so sporting. And frankly, we didn't get a really good feel for what it's like to play on our heels, but a lot of times you get spotted by a destroyer. There's nothing you can do. You can't outrun them. You can't make them show up, so you just have to play like any other cruiser and hope that they make a mistake. This is actually one of the only games I actually had any fun in, and I think it's because I naturally lean into wanting to be more aggressive in a ship like this. A lot of times that just doesn't work. It's like driving a Ferrari into the side of a cliff. In any case, I hope this little review has been useful for you guys, and I'll see you on the next one.